Recently I had the opportunity to address a group of parents in a medium small community. I'm not sure whether to call it a farming community necessarily, but not a college town or someplace you would think of as a necessarily progressive place, but we got to this subject of the Bible and God, and it occurred to me as I shared with them that any autobiography that anyone does of my life, of who I am, of what I believe, I can't conceive of an autobiography that is capable of taking in all of who I am, all of the things I've experienced, everything I believed, what I've felt, what I've been through, what I would recommend to others. And if there is no book that is adequate to contain all of me, then there certainly is no book that is adequate to contain all of God. As a Christian, I wish to have faith in the God the Bible speaks of, but not only in that part of God that the Bible tells. If God is a whole person, then certainly there are numerous parts of God and numerous aspects of God. Well, as the Apostle Paul, I believe it was, wrote, that if all the works of Jesus were recorded in books, the world wouldn't be adequate to contain them. I find a lot of good in the Bible. I think the Bible is a very special spiritual book, and yet it would be ludicrous to suggest that the Bible can contain all of God. Just as no book published anywhere can contain all of any one person, let alone someone as transcendent as God. But there's so much to be learned. I was asked to help address the topic of oracles recently, and it seemed to me that really an oracle is anything that can speak to you. So much of the world I grew up in, though, I think was very much a victim, and thus encouraged people to be victims of what I call polarized thinking. That there is one way or another way, and nothing in between. That all the gray areas have been removed. That somehow, I don't know how, everything has been documented so that there is nothing that remains to wonder about. And yet, by its very nature, life is forever creating new questions and new possibilities and new things to wonder about. I know I have Christian friends who would be aghast at the idea of tarot cards. And yet, to me, it's an area of beliefs. Because it's an area of beliefs, it makes all the difference in the world what I happen to believe about them. Whether I look to images on these cards to give me hard and fast answers to some specific question or aspect of my life, or whether I use them as a tool to encourage growth, spiritual, psychological growth. In what study I have done concerning tarot cards, it's my understanding that there are images on the cards, and that our brains and our hearts, not the intellectual, conscious part of our brains, but the subconscious mind and the soul and the spirit, often speak in images that cannot be contained by the limits of language. we simply don't have words to describe a lot of the things that we go through in life and a lot of the things that we see in our minds and feel in our hearts. A relationship with God, if it is truly a relationship with God, will inevitably bring things into life and into one's heart that defy description. When I look at tarot cards, I look at an image and I listen to the voices and images that arise from within me. I see an image and everything that I am interacts with the image. And I look for what I can learn. And I don't worry about being controlled. If God is a transcendent person, and we're created in God's image, then there is a sense in which we can transcend any of the things we're exposed to as well. And if the soul is an energy that can neither be created nor destroyed, but simply goes on forever, and if somehow God made it that way, then there's no reason to be afraid of anything. I can be exposed to all sorts of different images, all sorts of different insights, and come away having only learned. And the more I learn, the more I know myself. The more I listen to my heart and my mind and trust them to tell me the secrets that God has hid within me. And I really believe that the more anyone knows themselves, the less it matters whether anyone else is different. Spiritual works, artistic works, the one thing I believe they have in common is that everyone who's exposed to them gets something different out of them. One person looks at the cross and sees a man crucified and dying. The horrible torture, the pain, the agony, and the senselessness of it. Another person looks at it and sees the theological paying of a spiritual debt, the covering over of sins and wrongs, the reestablishment of a right relationship with God. But it's the same cross, and it's the same person. And the beads could mean anything. It goes back to one's beliefs. What do I believe about this? And what does my experience and my insight and my understanding teach me to see in this? And what significance do I assign to particular colors? I think spirituality is a very individual thing. And too often we approach it with fear because someone has told us that either you do it this way or you're doing something wrong and you're in great danger. And yet my soul is an eternal energy that cannot be destroyed. Even if I were to meet the devil himself, there would be some sort of interaction. But because God has created me as an eternal soul, I can't be destroyed. I recall an episode of Kung Fu: The Legend Continues that I saw on television once, in which the Shaolin priest passes his hand through a candle flame and speaks of understanding and interacting with the energy of the candle flame. And as it was dramatized, the suggestion is that he understands how the energy should interact so that the flame does not harm him. And I pondered that. I grew up in Wisconsin where, I don't know exactly, but it seems to me the average winter temperature in January was something like 25 below zero. I live in Colorado now, and they keep asking, how's the winter there? And I keep saying they haven't had it yet. But reflecting on this television show, it gave me a new way of thinking about cold. And not to think of it as an evil force to be avoided, but simply as just another aspect of the natural world around me. And perhaps not to be unwise, but not to run from cold as if it's something terrible to be feared, but to recognize it as just another experience, just another memory, just another way of seeing and feeling. And there aren't always words to explain what it is that I'm seeing and feeling, or why things mean what they do, or where a particular image came from. But something compels me to believe that there is a mystery in all of this, and that it is by searching out this mystery that I grow and learn, and each day become a little more than what I have been, and know a little bit more of myself, and can be a little more at peace with the differences between myself and others that I see in the lives of others. To recognize that they are on their own spiritual path, learning things that are appropriate for them to learn, I've often said that for whatever reason, everyone I know has their own emotional baggage. Sometimes related to families or upbringing, sometimes related to experiences from those outside their families, sometimes from sources we can't quite figure out. Some would say past lives, some would say I don't believe in past lives. Whatever. There are things that come into our memories, that come into our minds, sometimes deja vu. I had someone suggest to me once, and it made a lot of sense to me, that I believe God exists outside of time, that time is not a dimension that limits God, and that if we are created in God's image, there's part of us that shares that. And someone, actually a frequent member of one of my crews here, once suggested to me that it might very well be that our physical body is the only part of us that exists within time. And I kept pondering that, and it seemed to me that that made a lot of sense and would serve to explain partially these things of deja vu. That when I dream at night, there is part of my spirit that is no longer confined to my physical body, and it reaches out through time, or reaches out into a way of being that is not limited by time. And I begin to get glimpses of past and future events and all sorts of things. And sometimes when I wake up, I remember them. But when I wake up, I'm back inside of a very physical body, living within a very limited dimension of time, trying to remember that just as my whole life cannot be contained in a book, just as all of who I am cannot be contained within a book, in the same way, all of who I am cannot be contained in a physical body that is going to wear out. Especially when I consider a spirit of me that cannot be destroyed, that exists eternally. think in the world we live in today, there are so many distractions and so much rushing about. So many. We go to work, we go home, we build a house, we have kids, we go through generations, we go through rituals, we go to church on Sunday. And it's so easy to forget that this is not all there is. That going to work 40 hours a week or whatever, earning a certain pay, earning a set pay, living in a particular house, is not just about doing that job, earning that pay, living in that house. But it's also about what we're learning and who we're becoming, and the effect that what we're learning and who we're becoming is going to have on our eternal soul as the days and months and years and decades pass. That in the same way, whether it's tarot cards or crystal balls or particular theological books, that if we think about the images and the words and the experiences that come into our lives, we can come to a better understanding of who we are and of the world that we're in and of who God is. And yet it's so wonderful to know we'll never get to the end of it. As one of my past guests on a show said, we'll never run out. There will always be something new to discover, some freshness to life. That there will always be so many different ways of seeing things and so many different ways of being. And that if we choose to listen and receive it as such, it can all be very, very good and very, very beautiful. But if we choose to fear it, to set it aside, to refuse to listen, refuse to look, because someone has told us it's dangerous, how they would know, I'm not sure, but possibly just because someone told them and someone told them. And why continue a tradition of fear? And why continue a tradition of hate? And why continue a tradition of refusing to listen to the hearts and minds of others? Understanding that exposure to something different does not compel you or me or anyone to emulate it. It simply gives us something more to think about. Something new to explore, a new mirror to look into. I think there's a way in which all these different things can be a multitude of different kinds of mirrors. I'm told that when we look at a card and see a particular color, the reason we see that color is because the chemical composition at that point absorbs every color except the one we see. In the same way, I think there are mirrors and mirrors and mirrors that absorb certain facets of who we are and reflect certain facets back. And depending on the mirror, just as depending on the color, we see different facets of ourselves. I don't think we would know, and maybe we don't for this exact reason, I don't think we would know all the colors that make up white light unless there was a surface that refused to absorb each specific facet of white light. The only reason I see yellow is because it refuses to absorb yellow right there. If there was nothing that refused to absorb yellow, I would not know that white light contained yellow. If there was no mirror that showed me my virtues and my faults, if there was no experience that showed me a time when I was kind, how would I know that I was kind? That I was not a terrible person if someone told me I was? If I did not fail at something, how would I ever discover my weakness in that area? How would I know what my weaknesses were if I had not experienced something in which I had failed? How would I know God if I had not experienced something in which God's image within me was reflected back and thereby made evident? In the book of Psalms, King David wrote, "Surely you are a God who hides yourself." And I believe God has hidden him. I say himself just because that's what I'm used to, but I understand that God transcends gender. But I believe that God has hidden himself within me, within everything he's created, in everything his hand has ever touched. In the same way that as an artist, I wouldn't know how to create something and specifically keep all of a certain aspect of myself out of it. It is inevitable that as a creative artist, I reach out and I paint a picture, I write a book, I create something, and I cannot help but put part of me into it because I have touched it. I can't create something and not have part of me into it. I would have to be totally separate from it, and then I could not create it. But there are gestures and rituals and things that we attach particular symbolisms to. And I think it's good to maintain those rituals and those associations. But we need to think about why it is that we believe the things we do. It's not wrong to believe them, but if you don't know why you believe something, it's not, I don't want to say, how would you know it's right? Because it's not a question of right or wrong. But if you don't know why you believe something, I guess I'm more inclined to say, how would you know that you really do believe it? You know, do you believe something enough to really trust it? Or do you only believe it enough to say it? And I believe if it's something really worth believing in, it's going to give you the room to grow. And it's going to give you the freedom to grow. And it's going to give you something new to discover. And it's up to me to decide what these things will mean to me and how I will respond to them and how I will grow by them. And I think in that God is spirit and that God is transcendent, there is something of him, there is something of a living spirit in everything he has touched and made and created, whether we consider it living or not. And I think as we learn to listen, the Spirit of God throughout his creation, whether it be in rocks, or trees, images, whether there might be a guardian angel hiding behind any image we come upon. If we can learn to listen, the Spirit of God throughout his creation, I believe, will speak to us. And we will remember a little more of just who we really are. And then we can love others and in such a way that they are free to be a little more, to learn a little more of who they really are. And just as God's creation was put together in a unified, diverse, paradoxical whole. All of us can be a unified, paradoxical, wonderful sort of family as well. Thank you.